What does geometry look like at the smallest possible scale? One common assumption is that spacetime stays smooth all the way down, a continuous manifold, just very zoomed in. But there is another possibility. Instead of starting with a smooth manifold, we can start with a finite geometric carrier, a small, rigid object on which quantum data can be placed. In this video, we build one candidate for that carrier, a four-sheeted football Orbifold foam, suspended over the skeleton of a cube. To be clear from the start, the claim is not that space is literally made of tiny cubes. The cube is only a bookkeeping device. The real object is a foam of curved sheets, seams, and cone points, and it is far stranger and far more rigid than a cube. Every construction needs a blueprint, and ours is purely combinatorial. Take a cube and list every face of every dimension: 8 vertices, 12 edges, 6 squares, and 1 solid cell. Then record which pieces sit inside which. This incidence data forms the face poset of a cube. The poset carries no geometry at all. It only answers one question: which strata are allowed to meet? 0-dimensional pieces, 1-dimensional pieces, 2-dimensional pieces. The poset says who touches whom, and nothing more. Think of it as scaffolding on a construction site. The scaffolding fixes where things attach, but it is not the building. The building itself will be an Orbifold foam, assembled over this skeleton. The basic tile of the foam is a football Orbifold, sometimes called a spindle. Topologically, it is just a sphere, but at its north and south poles the geometry is singular. The surface is pinched into cone points, where the total angle around the point is less than a full turn. Each football has exactly 2 cone points, and the cube has exactly 8 vertices. That arithmetic suggests a pairing. Group the 8 vertices into 4 antipodal pairs, 1 pair along each body diagonal of the cube. Now attach 1 football sheet to each pair, so that its 2 cone points land on opposite corners of the scaffold. This gives 4 compact, 2-dimensional Orbifold sheets, threaded through the interior of the cube. In the interior, the sheets are allowed to overlap. Where they meet, they will be glued, and that gluing locus is where the real structure lies. Where the 4 sheets intersect, we glue them along a 1-dimensional locus called the seam graph, gamma. The seam graph splits into 3 families, and we mark them with 3 colors: red, green, and blue, 1 family for each coordinate plane. Gluing the 4 sheets along the seams produces the full carrier, a stratified Orbifold foam. We call it the seed. Now notice the counting: 4 sheet labels, plus 3 seam colors, a palette of exactly 7 internal labels. These colors are not decoration. They are discrete internal labels attached to the strata of the foam, packaged as a labeling map from strata to the 7-letter alphabet. So the picture has 3 layers. The cube poset gives the incident skeleton, the football sheets give the Orbifold geometry, and the 7-color labeling records the internal algebraic structure of the Planck cell. Next, geometry in the metric sense. Each football sheet is furnished with the same abstract Riemannian metric, written in action angle form. On the regular part of a sheet there are 2 local coordinates, an action coordinate running from pole to pole, and an angle coordinate running around the spindle. A profile function controls how wide the spindle is at each height, and it degenerates at the 2 ends, producing cone-type asymptotics at the poles. The exact profile is not essential. What matters is that the same metric template is stamped onto all 4 sheets. And there is a rigidity condition. Wherever 2 sheets meet along a seam, their induced metrics must agree. So the seam graph is not merely topological glue. It is metric glue. It forces 4 separate sheets to behave as 1 coherent metric foam. Here is where dimension 2 becomes special. On an oriented surface, a Riemannian metric determines a conformal structure. Equivalently, it determines a complex structure, geometrically, rotation by 90 degrees in every tangent plane. And in real dimension 2, every almost complex structure is integrable, so this is a genuine local complex structure, essentially for free. But our phone is a Klein-type object, so we should not demand a single global complex orientation. Instead, each sheet gets a local orientation, and a transition across a seam may either preserve it or reverse it. If orientation is preserved, the transition is holomorphic. If it is reversed, the transition is anti-holomorphic. Allowing both is exactly the dianalytic setting. So the common metric meshes perfectly with the Klein structure. The phone is not merely a topological space. It is a metric, dianalytic orbifold phone. Now bring in symmetry. Introduce a finite group, pi of seam-preserving piecewise isometries. An element of pi sends sheet pieces to sheet pieces, seam pieces to seam pieces, and cone points to cone points, preserving the metric on every smooth piece. And here is the central observation of the whole construction. Every seam-preserving piecewise isometry automatically induces a dianalytic automorphism of the Klein phone. The proof is short. An isometry of a surface preserves the metric, so it preserves the conformal class. If it also preserves local orientation, it commutes with the induced complex structure, so it is holomorphic. If it reverses local orientation, it anti-commutes with the complex structure, so it is anti-holomorphic. Either way, the map is dianalytic piece by piece, and seam compatibility assembles the pieces into an automorphism of the full phone. The converse fails. A dianalytic automorphism preserves angles, but it may stretch distances, so the isometry group sits strictly inside the dianalytic automorphism group. Piecewise isometry is the stronger, more rigid condition. It is metric symmetry, not just complex symmetry. Why insist on the stronger condition? Because metrics have spectra. On each sheet, the metric defines a Laplace-Beltrami operator, the operator behind heat flow, waves, and vibration modes. If a map between two sheets is an isometry, then pulling functions back and forth intertwines the two Laplacians exactly. In other words, the spectral theory of one sheet is transported, mode by mode, onto the spectral theory of another. Near cone points and seams, one must be careful about domains, matching conditions, and self-adjoint extensions, but the principle survives. A seam-preserving piecewise isometry transports the entire spectral problem, not just the underlying space. A dianalytic map cannot promise that. An isometry can. So the group pi is not a group of visual symmetries. It is a group of metric and spectral symmetries of the phone. So far, the phone is pure mathematics. Now decorate it with physics. Regard the fixed foam as a kinematic carrier, not spacetime itself, but a microscopic stage on which quantum structures can be placed. Here is one possible assignment. One sheet carries electromagnetism, quantized circle group data, modeled by a line bundle with a connection, and its curvature. A second sheet carries the weak sector, with chirality, encoded through the orientation-sensitive, dianalytic structure. A third sheet carries the strong sector, where the three seam colors suggest the three-color channels of the strong force. And the fourth sheet carries gravity, not as a classical background, but as its own quantum geometric sector. The kinematic state space of a single cell is then a tensor product of the four sector spaces. But the seam graph imposes constraints between the sectors, allonomy matching, cone defect conditions, and compatibility rules along red, green, and blue. The physical states are exactly the ones annihilated by those constraints. In the quantum picture, the seam graph is not only glue, it is a constraint graph. The symmetry group now splits into two levels. Before any physics is assigned, the four metric sheets are perfectly interchangeable, and the bare symmetry group is the full group of piecewise isometries. After the quantum decorations are fixed, a symmetry must also respect the labels, electromagnetic, weak, strong, and gravitational. The decorated symmetry group is generally smaller. That is a natural symmetry breaking picture built directly into the geometry. And the cosmological reading is deliberately modest. Spacetime is not assumed at the start. If it exists at all in this framework, it should emerge as a coarse-grained limit of many constrained quantum geometric cells, stitched together seam to seam. So here is the whole construction in one breath. A cube poset gives a finite blueprint. 4 football sheets turn it into a stratified metric phone. In dimension 2, The metric induces a Klein structure, so every piecewise isometry is automatically dianalytic. Isometries transport spectra, and quantum sector data turns the seed into a candidate Planck cell. Whether the universe is built from such cells is an open question, but the mathematics of the carrier stands on its own.